All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Latricia Adams. I am the chair of the Shelby County Lead Prevention and Sustainability Commission, and also founder, CEO, and president of Black Millennials for Flint. We are so excited today to work with our esteemed partners with the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative, as well as the Memphis Shelby County HHP. I'm actually going to turn it over to the dynamic and phenomenal Sharon Hyde to provide some opening remarks and some announcements.
Hi, thank you. We just wanted to thank everybody from the Healthy Housing Partnership that is here. We are recording this, so we will send it out to the full membership after the meeting. Apologize for the short meeting announcement. It has been a crazy month with all the CARES funding, which is great for our city and state, but it slowed down some progress on other activities. So I just want to welcome everybody today and let you know that we will be having a meeting again, starting our regular meetings in February. I don't know if we'll be going live yet, but we are hopeful that soon thereafter we can hopefully be together again. So thanks, Latricia.
All righty. So since we have a virtual but intimate group this afternoon, we definitely hope that you all will fellowship with us and really just make this an open dialogue. Today we have esteemed Representative London Lamar, who will be speaking alongside Sharon. And so as we prepare for our babies, our students, to transition back into classrooms in some of our schools here in Shelby County, we want to be forward thinking and proactive about what things should we think about as community members, as leaders, as parents, as caretakers, as our children transition back into physical classrooms. And so with that, we already know Sharon, who works with the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative, does tremendous work alongside with LaBonner as well, and just a champion for environmental justice in the Memphis community. And then with Representative Lamar, we have worked very closely with her, where we'll talk about this a little bit later in the panel, what was very instrumental in amplifying the voices of the community to get a bill passed this past legislative session, which would amend the current bill around mandatory testing for lead and water in schools. So I am actually going to get us started. So let's start with the first question. So the first question is really important. It's kind of what ties us here today. As kids are preparing and parents are preparing for students to go back into classrooms, what are some things that we should anticipate? What are some things that we would want to know more about or communicated from our school leadership? And Sharon or London, you can begin.
I'll begin. Thank you so much for inviting me to this panel. It's always been a joy working with you all, Black Millennials for Flint, the Lead Prevention Council, everyone who's involved in making sure our children have healthy drinking water. And it's also been a privilege to work with you last session on our legislation and continue to push that legislation forward so we can get some more accountability around our school drinking water and lead in our kids' drinking waters in the schools. So just a brief overview or just some little things that I expect us to be thinking about as our children begin going back to school. As parents, I want to encourage you to ask questions around school safety and keeping our children safe from COVID. You know, what is going to be the classroom sizes? Are there going to be any PPE resources available to our children to keep them safe, such as masks and gloves? Are there any protocols regarding social distancing in the classrooms? How will they eat? What will the food situation be like? Is it going to be buffet style again? You know, what are the safety precautions we're putting in place? And parents have a right to ask those questions and wonder what will be put in place before they can make the decision on if they're going to let their children come back or not. I will also ask the question on, will Shelby County have full autonomy over deciding whether they can bring children back to school, do a hybrid model, or continue to stay virtual? Right now at the state of Tennessee, we're having conversations with the Department of Education on, is this going to be a statewide mandate on how we're going to proceed with letting our children come back to school, or will districts have autonomy to make the decisions based on the COVID numbers in their counties? It also is a fight between rural versus urban. Obviously, the urban areas have more issues regarding COVID because we're more populated than many of the rural areas. We also have more capacity to have virtual school because we are more technologically advanced than some of the rural areas who don't even have broadband. So some of their children are falling behind, or there is a necessity to have kids in school because they don't have the technologies in their homes because of the lack of resources and technology in the rural areas. So those are some of the things we're thinking about. We have to make sure we base our decisions off the science and the data first. We also need to be aware of our children's health conditions. Do they have any pre-existing conditions? But I do understand parents' concerns. I think that's up to individual decision. I think that I personally think that parents should have the option of both. If they feel comfortable sending their children back to school, if the district does provide safety precautions that they feel are to the level that they expect to keep their children safe, then, you know, you should have the option to go back to school. And if teachers feel like there are resources put in place to keep them safe, then by all means. But if you don't feel comfortable sending your children back to school, you should be allowed to continue with the virtual education. And overall, this is challenging us as a state to rethink how we do education and how we are going to move forward with learning, because this is truly changed the way we educate our children. It's also getting us to think that, you know, some children should be able to, especially when you think about ninth grade and high school, some of our kids can go ahead and begin their careers, because every child is not college bound, but we can start looping them into trade schools where they can get out, get a good job with a specific specialty trade and make a great living.
And I'd like to add, on top of like the PPE and making sure they're safe COVID wise, is making sure that these schools that tested, not just the 20 and aboves, but I'm talking the 5s, the 10s, and the 15s, have an action plan for making sure when those kids go back to school that there is no lead in the water. We worry so much about the water that has been sitting for 9 months. There was supposed to be a plan put in place to assure that everything over 15 was going to get an annual test, which should be coming up. So I'd like to know the plan of this annual test, plus the 20 plus schools, if all the faucets and water facility, have been turned off. What is their procedures for bringing in bottled water? What about cooking? Things like that. So I really would like parents to also ask these questions to make sure that those schools, that especially those very high schools of 20 plus, we know, what they've done with those fixtures and what they're going to do with supplying bottled water, not only for drinking, but for cooking. We also worry so much about the kids being safe at home. We are seeing here at GHHI so many kids that now the families are experiencing energy burden higher than normal, which is very high in the communities that we serve. And so we have children 3, 4, 5 in a house running the lights, opening up the refrigerator, having internet, continually. And so these families are struggling with utility bills as well as good nutritious food while they're at home. So those are some of the things I think about. And I want them to be safe in school, but if they are going to do virtual, I want them to be safe at home also, and be sure that not only the lead in the schools, but the lead in their houses are tested, and make sure we're safe at home as well.
Those are some really, really great things that we should all be considering with this transition. Something else that comes to mind, I'm going to ask just a follow-up question here. So even though we are in an interesting point where we have a current president who has not actually conceded, however, thinking ahead with the Biden-Harris administration, what are some things from a federal perspective that we think is necessary, specifically as it relates to the intersection of lead exposure with COVID-19? What are some things that we need the new administration to focus on? What is it that we need Congress and the Senate to focus on from a federal level? Because right now it's adult bickering going on with settling on what's going to be the next COVID package, but specifically, what are we going to do about our babies? So just wanted to get your insight and thoughts from a federal perspective.
So I'll jump in there and then, pass the mic on. I think that it kind of circles back to our bill. What our piece of legislation is trying to do is to update the lead code to what the federal lead and copper rule is. Right now that they're going to update that. And I think that if the federal government go ahead and implement the latest copper and lead rule, which will lower the amount of parts per billion of lead in the water, to hold and include that in the bill that every state has to meet these standards. Then the work that I'm doing with this piece of legislation is unnecessary, because it's the federal government already mandates that there has to be a certain amount of lead in the water to get it taken out, and they lower that number so there is lower amounts of lead in our schools drinking water. Then there is a uniformed accountability across the board, across the nation, on what is expected in the drinking water in our schools. And when we think about COVID and the fact that those with pre-existing conditions and those with medical conditions are most at risk, and if we think about lead in drinking water makes our children unsafe, then if it makes our children unsafe, then we have a lot of leverage to add that into the federal package about what accountability we need to put in place in order to keep our children safe. And so again, to wrap that up, that means if the federal government puts uniform accountability on how much lead needs to be in our children's drinking water as a reason to prevent the spread of COVID, because lead in drinking water makes our children more vulnerable, then I think that we are also making sure we're keeping our children safe. And that is a federal policy that can stem on down to the states. And we wouldn't necessarily have to push my bill on the state level because Congress already done it.
Yeah, and I agree. I really wish that EPA, CDC, and HUD would get together and really come up with a number that is, what is the safe? We know that 20 parts per billion is not safe, 15 parts per billion is not safe, down to 0 parts per billion. I mean, the information that has been put out is they just came up with a number that was basically on the premise of affordability for cities to get rid of their lead in the water. And that's where this 15 came up. The CDC has said there's no safe level of lead in drinking water. HUD has said this. So if those three big powerhouses came together and we had people in charge of those three that would look at this as, let's combine all of our resources, let's combine our, and come up with, there is no safe level of lead in drinking water, and it is causing not just the children to be sick, but the body burden when they get older is really causing tragedy in our neighborhoods that we're serving, especially with violence. There's studies about guns, and using gun violence is more prominent for people who have been linked back to being lead poisoned. So, but let's get a number. Let's get a federal number that says this is what, and go to Congress, this is what the number should be across the nation, and not this Flint, Philadelphia, Baltimore, now Arizona, fighting to get their levels lowered. We know where it should be, and let's just fight to get it there.
I 100% agree with the comments from both Representative Lamar and you, Sharon. I think one of the things that is just so mind-boggling is that there's not a universal federal mandate to test for water in schools. I would be remiss not to mention that in the state of Michigan, there's still not a law mandating testing for lead and water in schools in Michigan. Who prides themselves on being clean Michigan, with the Great Lakes right there. Of course, with the Flint water crisis, you would think that that would take precedence to have as many protections as possible. But again, I just think that there definitely should be more of a push from the federal level to ensure that there's testing across the board. There are too many options, right? And going back to what Sharon talked about, even with setting the threshold, which is still high at 15 parts per billion, is not people-centered, right? And so giving the option to test is, I mean, it's counterproductive. So glad that you all mentioned those things. So perfect segue. So recently, and Representative Lamar touched on this a little bit. So recently, SCS released a statement communicating that 65% of students will continue with virtual learning coming up in the next semester in 2021, whereas 24% will return to in-person instruction, and there was another margin of 11% that didn't respond to the survey that was distributed to parents. So thinking about that 24% and that 11%, so that 35% of students who may be returning to the building, what should parents be prepared for? So the parents that are going to, you know, go out there and push the babies forward. We know that instruction in the physical space is the most impactful. From a parental perspective, how can we keep them encouraged? What things should we share with them?
Absolutely. That's a great question. First and foremost, there is no right or wrong answer to what you want to do with your child. And parents got to be confident that they are in the best position to make the best choice for their own children. And you need to understand that regardless of what choice you choose, we as a state are doing everything we can to provide resources to make whichever choice more effective, more efficient, and keep all our children safe. What I am concerned about is still, regardless of the choice, is socioeconomic impacts of this year. As we know, even that most of them are staying virtual, the fact that parents are having to rethink if they can go to work or not. How are we going to continue to feed the children when half of them are in school and half of them are at home? What is the lunch system going to look like? Because as we know, many children are dependent on that one meal a day that they get at school that's often been disrupted, and how we're going to continue feeding our children as well. What is going to look like for teachers? You know, how are we going to split the teachers up from those who are going to come to the school building and those who are not? How are we going to, do the classroom sizes? So I think that, from my opinion, you have to make the best decision that's going to work for you. Just know that we are pushing for safe PPP options for those who decide to come back to school. I personally will encourage, if you can, and if you feel comfortable, that children need to go to school, in my personal opinion, because overall our children are going to fall a year behind because of this year. They are falling behind, even though we haven't come out with a firm decision on testing yet. But we know that if we do the testing this year, it's not going to reflect accurately where our children are, because what we do know is a lot of children are not even in school this year. They didn't even enroll. So we also are thinking about is that going to affect our BEP numbers of school funding next year, because we don't even have accurate numbers on attendance. And so our school is going to be shortage of funding next year because the attendance numbers are right. So at this point, I think that parents need to do the best they can to keep their children on track this year, whether you feel like you could do this at home or they need to go back into the brick and mortar school. But I know right now, my main concern is thinking about how we're going to catch everybody up the following year, because this year it's just a disaster and it's nobody's fault. We did not anticipate COVID coming. Nobody anticipated COVID coming. But right now, I do think that there's no right or wrong decision. Everybody is struggling. Just be at peace with whatever decision you make. And we're going to do what we can to make sure that the test is not going to be held accountable to teachers or students. We're going to be able to maintain the level of funding that each student gets. We're going to boost the opportunity to increase technology access for everybody in both urban, suburban, and rural areas. And we're going to make sure we're boosting resources to make sure that we can get everybody back in school next year, especially with a vaccine coming out. I will still be weary personally. I think that you should be very careful about taking a vaccine that comes out this early. But that is an option for those who may have to take that option. And for those who are really wanting to get their children back in school, you do have that option. So with that being said, I mean, regardless of what the percentage numbers are, I just still don't think that we're going to be able to accurately educate our children this year, regardless of if they go to school or do virtual.
And on top of that, I just heard, I was really kind of shocked that 65% were going to still keep their children at home, until I saw that those that go to school will have a virtual teacher. So the teacher and the children will not be in the classroom together. So me as a parent, I think that would be weird. I mean, who is going to be supervising the kids? What kind of control, is going to be given to make sure that they are sitting at their desk and learning and not, you can kind of do that as a parent when you're watching your children at home. So that kind of surprised me that teachers would be virtual in the rooms that had children. So then I kind of was like, oh, well, that's strange. So, but for parents, I'm like you. I just want them to know that, everyone is working towards having the children safe in your home and at school. And this year, I'm like you. I'm so fearful. The truancy, there's basically not a truancy law or whatever there is right now. I mean, kids just decide to go to school or not. I had my godson keep telling me he keeps getting zeros by this teacher, and he goes, I don't have this teacher's name. Well, no one from the school contacted the family. He wasn't taking a class because he was taking English with another teacher, but they were showing him zeros. Like, no one even caught that this kid was going to school every day with another English teacher. So the truancy, the lack of, really learning, I think is going to be a detriment to our kids this year, especially those that have learning disabilities anyway, that are on IEP. From my understanding, the counselors are really not calling the kids, helping them through tutoring like they would be in the brick and mortar school. So I just worry a lot about the education this year, but want parents to know that there are people out here, including the teachers, including the administrators of the school. Everybody wants kids to succeed.
Right.
Because, like you said, for funding, for numbers, for everything that, you want your school to have great testing scores. But how do we get there? But working together, I just think it's always more powerful with partnerships, and for the schools to really go out and say, this is the help we need, this is what we want to do, this is where we're struggling, and let partners all come together to help. You hate to say it takes a village, but with our children right now, it does. And really work, but have parents also have education available in the schools, not to scare them with lead, not to scare them with COVID, but just, simple facts to help them understand we can avoid COVID, we can avoid lead if we just take these precautions. So let the education of these, pandemics and diseases and all be out there for the schools to use to help the parents.
Absolutely. And I think like a lot of parents are making a hard choice of sending their children back to school because they have to go to work. And they want to make sure that they want their children to learn, but they need help with accountability. Virtual learning has been the hardest on parents with smaller children because smaller children's attention spans are much shorter. You know, they are less technologically advanced, more technologically advanced than some of our adults, but you know, virtual learning is very, very hard. Especially, you know, someone who's young, who, you know, no fault of their own, they see a game, they're going to click off and, you know, a child is a child. And so I think that we can see, I think this is an opportunity to test it out as well. Let's see how we do with the brick and mortar and see, you know, what's going on with virtual, because what I can say, I think that, you know, maybe our elementary and middle school kids need to go back to school, and then we are able to implement more virtual learning for high school students who are more, if they're, once they enter high school, they are kind of are who they are. At that point, we can kind of steer those who are college bound and be college bound, or those who need to go for a trade to go that way. And even using it as an opportunity for our students who are going for a trade to be, you know, skilled in water and engineering and infrastructure, to do some of those on-hand jobs to help keep our drinking water clean. We do need folks who working for MLG&W who have to look at these sewer systems, these water systems, and we can start pushing them towards vocational school in this time. And so we can also be creative on how we can use our students to steer them into paths where they can be more successful at making sure they are taking on careers and opportunities that are giving back to community and helping keeping our children safe.
Awesome. I want to address a question that came in the chat box. So just to give a little bit of context in regards to the Shelby County Lead Prevention and Sustainability Commission. Let's go back to 2018. So in 2018 is when, at that time, Senator Lee Harris introduced the bill that is currently in place, calling for mandatory testing for lead and water in schools. I always say this, that even though we know that these are basic human rights, it is still very progressive, especially in a state like Tennessee, where there are barely 10 states in our country that actually has this type of legislation. And so that bill went into effect in January 2019, when now Mayor Lee Harris went into office, is when the Lead Prevention and Sustainability Commission actually was established. And so one of the roles of the commission is to provide community oversight as it relates to all forms of lead. Of course, we're a new commission. We were established in September of 2019. And so the first task that we were given from the mayor's office was to focus on the lead prevention bill and the implementation. In addition to that, it also creates a point where we can serve as a liaison between parents, community members, other elected officials that have an impact with environmental justice issues. And then the question was, what has the commission done? So the biggest thing that we accomplished was to strengthen the bill, which Representative Lamar was able to introduce. So in the current bill, for example, child care facilities are not included. We know that the younger you are, the more vulnerable you are to exposure to lead. We were very adamant about making sure that our smallest little bundles of joy were included in that legislation. We've also worked really hard to ensure that there is funding to actually support the legislation. We know the quickest way for a bill to fail is that you can't implement it. And so we have worked closely with the Shelby County Health Department to ensure that there's support for the childhood lead poison prevention program. Also worked with the county and with the city, which is exciting, to ensure that there is funding as it relates to lead and housing. So when we talk about this particular commission, it's not only specific to lead and water in schools. We want to focus on the ways that you're exposed to lead in all forms. So I hope that that answered that question. If not, I'd love to talk more offline and provide some more information about that. So thank you for that question. And if you haven't already, I'll drop a link before we conclude today where you can sign up for our commission listserv. And so we like to keep folks updated on things happening locally, things happening at the state level, just so you can get as much transparency as possible. So wanted to add that and make sure that I attempted to thoroughly answer that question. So we are going to transition to the next question. And I think this next question is a good segue. So as we mentioned several times, and I'm going to keep boosting up Representative Lamar. So again, during the last legislative session, Representative Lamar unanimously got a bill passed. That's a big deal. To get a bill where everyone was in favor. So definitely not a partisan bill, calling for those robust and more rigid requirements for testing. How do we foresee the bill introduced by London Lamar, which is HB 2017, how do we foresee it impacting students' return to school in January?
So that's a great question. So just a little background, we got this bill passed unanimously in the House, but the Senate did not take up any more legislation that was not directly COVID related. And so most of the legislators who had bills through the House but were sitting in the Senate, that stopped. So we have to reintroduce the bill this session starting in January, which a month and a half from now. So we're going to bring this bill back. It'll have a new bill number. It'll be the same exact language. So we expect it to be able to fly through the House effectively, especially with the fact that they passed it unanimously already. And we'll be working hard to get it through the Senate this year. So if you know anything about passing a bill, it has to pass the state House, the state Senate, and then it goes to the governor's desk. So we can get this through the Senate and onto the governor's desk and back through the House. We are looking in good shape, and it will be implemented before school starts in the fall. So if we get this bill passed and the governor signs it by the end of the session, what we'll do is reduce the amount of PPE before to 15 parts per billion, and before that water, when that water source has to get taken out. This bill will also make sure that the Department of Education, in consultation with the Department of Health, creates a uniform testing criteria that everyone has to follow across the state. Right now is it's based on like your county. So Shelby County has its own program. Another county has its program if they have one. So what this requires is a standardized testing protocol across the state of Tennessee. Everyone would know what the standards are. Everyone has to follow, and we can ensure that everyone has clean drinking water. It will also bring us up into the same standards as the federal copper and lead rule that's supposed to be coming down from the federal government. Ideally, I hope the federal government does it like we talked about earlier, so I won't have to worry about getting it through the House or the Senate. The whole country has to follow this rule, and we can make sure all schools in the nation have safe drinking water with little lead in them, even though it should be zero lead, but we got to get to where we can go. Thank God for Lee Harris's, Senator Harris, now Mayor Harris, initial bill, which puts it at 20. My bill is trying to bring it down to 15. So we can get it down to 15. We're now reducing the amount of water incrementally in our children's drinking water, and we're going to create a uniform process. And again, if we can get this bill passed, not only do traditional public schools have to be held accountable, but we include charter schools and daycare facilities that are approved by the state of Tennessee. So it is expanding the accountability for entities that deal with children and making sure there's uniformity across all of these entities around our drinking water. And so again, we can't necessarily have too much control of what people are doing in their homes, but we can have more control over what our children are intaking in our public school system.
And, you know, I'm thankful for you, London, and then the mayor also, and also putting me on the lead commission to, and the question about what all we do, we've also are supporting several grants that are being implemented, environmental justice by the EPA. So just giving our support for those and information that they need to make sure that we are doing the right thing with lead in the water and in homes. But I'd like to add to that, I wouldn't, the bill that's in place now, I just want the schools to also be held accountable to those rules that are in place right now. We know they're too high, we know that they're 20, but have that policy that's supposed to be in place right now, retest these schools that were 20 above, and have the safe drinking water in the schools. So that's one thing I would like to know before the school starts in the spring is, have these schools been retested? What is the plan for retesting? What is the plan for when the schools still are high and the parents get really, you know, upset, they're scared, and then the health department comes in and has to test the children, and just have that, you know, a system in place that we know, you know, how they can get their child, you know, tested. What happens when your child is a 1 versus a 5 in the blood lead levels, you know, just education to help support the parents and things that they can do, like, you know, eating healthy foods, you know, making sure your toddlers aren't crawling on the ground. So it's not just the school, like I said, it's in the homes too. But make sure that what's implemented in place now for the spring is we have some transparency, we know what's going on with these schools, and then hopefully by the fall we could have it passed by the Senate and the governor to have it even lower, and look at these schools that were between the 15 and 20 that the parents weren't notified of anything.
Yeah, it's work to be done, but I can't help but to think about how far we've come. You know, I'm a native Memphian, but I've had an opportunity to live elsewhere, and a lot of the work that I was able to bring within this process came from a bill that I actually helped to get passed in DC. And so while we know that 15 parts per billion is too high, any level is too high, but in DC, for example, it's at 5 billion. So sometimes we get a lot of pushback saying, well, no level is safe. Of course, no level is safe. However, from a legislative policy perspective, we know that it's a marathon and not a race. And so even having something in place already is moving in the right direction. I think what I would love to see more of is for the culture to shift. So I think, you know, with some of the massacre like that happened with Flint, just puts everybody on edge. And I believe that when I talk about a culture shift is stop pointing blame, right? Like, let's be action oriented, let's be solutions oriented. Let's not expend so much energy on fault, but really let's figure out how we can actually just remove lead from our environment. Well, from our living environments, from our working environments where our children play. It's not like we don't know what to do. We know exactly what to do to mitigate these issues. So I echo Sharon. I'm really grateful for former Senator Lee Harris, current Mayor Lee Harris, as well, of course, as Representative London Lamar. So with that, I'm going to transition to the next question. And then following that, I'd love for those who are on with us, if you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and drop those in the chat box. So the next question, so with COVID numbers escalating in Shelby County, what are some best practices for safely providing families with resources to maintain healthy home environments? So especially with our babies spending more time at home, what are some things that we should discuss to make sure that our babies are thriving while they're in this virtual space?
Well, one thing, we do have with GHHI, we have a grant with Memphis Infrastructure. So the nurses in these family partnership programs can recommend a assessment done where we look at all the hazards in the house and give them education and tips and PPE for the family, including gloves, masks, disinfectant, hand soap. Things that sometimes they can't get if the grocery store is out of it, or, you know, it's hard for people to get to a grocery store sometime. But then we also give them healthy housing cleaning kits using vinegar and baking soda or borax instead of these harsh chemicals that are making the children sick, especially those with allergies and asthma. Talking about the asthmatic conditions of the house, having bookshelves in their rooms, having teddy bears in their room, things that are collecting dust, not just dust for allergens and asthma triggers, but also dust if they're near the window that's in an older house that may have lead dust on it. So just working with the parents, giving them ideas on what they can do themselves. We look at it 3 ways: environmental hazards, which is lead, radon, asbestos; structural hazards, which is weatherization of their house, roofs, structural issues; and then behavioral hazards, things that people can take ownership to make sure that their houses and living conditions are healthier and safe. So we're very fortunate to be working with Le. We're also working with the county Office of Sustainability, and we have grant funding from EPA now to make sure that these homes are safe, energy efficient, and affordable. So we are very excited that the Healthy Housing Partnership, we have so many good partners that work with us on a daily basis, that have, we have eviction attorneys that can help on problems with code violations. We have counselors like United Housing and Fraser CDC. We have Build Memphis that is supporting the communities. And of course, the city and county both, mayors and executives that work so closely. Paul Young with HCD, of course, is, you know, goes above and beyond to make sure that homes are safe and healthy. There's 2 lead grants right now, one for the city and one for the county. And so just working all with these partners, starting to work together with the weatherization team, with some of the THDA money, to look at the house as a whole system, not just do weatherization here, letter date, but have the house, make it safe altogether so the families are safe while they are sheltering in place.
Yes, absolutely. Those are some phenomenal things to communicate to parents. I want to add another layer to the conversation. So let's talk about, so we talked a lot about today about what's happening at the state level. We've talked about work that's being done with the county. Let's move to the city of Memphis. So specifically as it relates to infrastructure. So over the past 4 years, even from a federal level, we've heard the word infrastructure over and over again. However, we haven't really seen at large infrastructure changes that specifically helps to ameliorate environmental justice issues. So I actually attended a Memphis Urban League meeting with City Council, I would say maybe like a year and a half, 2 years ago. And one of the council persons stated that MLGW had not done an infrastructure plan since the 90s. Again, since the 90s, my God. So that being said, MLGW did a GIS map linking all of the various lead service pipelines throughout the city and the county, which is great. We know where they are, but the next step is what's going to happen. So are they going to be replaced? How is it going to be prioritized? Citizens of Memphis need more clarity and transparency about what remediation will look like. For either Representative Lamar or for Sharon, like, what do you think that the citizens of Memphis should be asking for with the city of Memphis and also for MLGW?
Well, I'll come in and say I'm not a city of Memphis government official, so I don't want to talk too much about what can be done in the city because it's kind of out of my lane. But what I will say, some of the things we should think about asking based on what are some of the expectations I have of people to ask from me is an updated plan on how are we mitigating and keeping track of lead that's flowing through our water systems in the city, and how much funding is that going to cost? And that way, those are requests the city can ask of the state to figure out, do we have money in our budget to send down to the city of Memphis to help mitigate some of the issues with lead? And if not, that's an ask from the state to the federal government saying, the federal government, you need to put in some more funding in your, or even making an expenditure to send money down to the states so that we can flow that money down to the local government to be able to help build on that infrastructure. Or even more, if I think about this bill, the federal government sending down money to the state level, the Department of Education and Department of Health has the funding to execute the lead prevention testing that we are trying to implement with this bill. And there's funding set aside, and then the Department of Education and Health can get with the city officials to figure out how we can best do this. So I would say that on that. I don't want to speak too much on behalf of the city.
Well,
You're on mute.
Yeah.
sorry. So having that map is great, but MLG&W does have free water testing. And so if people on these streets with the lead water line, want to get their house tested, it's free of charge to get your house tested by MLG&W. But more education about what they need to do in the interim while they're on the street. I mean, every house on the lead line should have information that says, A, you can get your house tested. B, this is what you need to do. Run your water, before drinking any water, all your taps. Things like that, to really help them, know how it is safe to be in these houses. Drink bottled water if you do have lead in your water system. Have a filtration system in place. Resources to help people get the filtration systems. So MLG&W has been partnering with us, and the people local, the people that we work with, they really want to protect their clients, but I think more education needs to be done to make sure people know where to go, how to get a lead test, if their street is on a lead water line, and things like that. But having the city and the county both having lead grants that the one thing about HUD, and this is something, we're talking locally, but federally, taking water lines out is not part of the lead grant. So even with the lead testing under the Healthy Homes funds, which is a small amount, you can test for water, or you have to test for water under your investigation to make sure that there's water is not, but there's no funds to take out the lead water lines. So if a house does show that they have lead in the water, then you could do small remediations, but you only have about $5,000 out of your total budget to do anything Healthy Homes that doesn't have to do with lead. So I just think on a federal level, that's something that I think is crazy, that the lead grants do not have funding for lead water lines to be fixed, replaced, or make the homeowners safe. So that's my 2 cents there.
Yeah, and I really love the point that you made, both Sharon and Representative Lamar. But I think, and this is a good segue as we are wrapping up here shortly, from an advocacy perspective, I think the way that you map that out makes it really clear around how the federal government works with state government, to the local government. And I want to circle back to something that Sharon mentioned about energy burden. So there's quite a bit of a loss with Memphis being, one of the top cities with poverty, and the issues surrounding needing weatherization done for homes, and folks just spending a lot of money for utilities, and those folks that can't afford to pay their utilities is always constant debt in the city, as it relates to just energy. So I think that, it's important to kind of connect those dots. But I think from a point of advocacy, we do need to be more vocal about the need to just replace the pipes. We know that it can be done. Let's look at Newark, for example. So while Newark, is in the process of replacing the lead service pipelines, it's because there was almost a near Flint disaster that happened. We don't want that to happen. I know I don't want that to happen in Shelby County, in Memphis. So I think from an advocacy perspective, we can be more proactive and make those asks. And a next step that we can consider as community members, citizens of Shelby County and Memphis, is to request that there be an infrastructure plan. I think, with us bridging these good relationships, we have this commission. The commission has good rapport with clearly state representatives, with districts, with the city. I think that it's a really good opportunity to really think forward and be forward thinking about how can we get to the source of the matter. So not just doing those quick remediation steps, but just really, let's just get rid of all of these lead pipes so that we can enjoy this beautiful water we got with the aquifer. Let's really enjoy it, without fear of coming into contact with any forms of lead. So with that, I would like for both Representative Lamar and Sharon just to leave some parting words as we transition from today. This has just been such a great learning experience. I like when we have convenings or collaborations where they're actionable things. They're tangible things that you can actually do. Thank you for not making this just a gripe session. So this, I know for me, has been very helpful. I hope it was helpful for those who are on with us this afternoon. So Representative Lamar, Sharon, last words.
Well, first and foremost, I want to say thank you so much for opportunity to educate our listeners on the work we were doing on the state to reduce lead in our drinking water and keep our children safe. This is a very uncertain time for the whole nation and the whole world. And so I do want people to know this, to be vigilant, keep your eyes open, stay educated on what's going on, and hold our entities accountable to keeping our children safe. Even for coming from my position as a legislator, and I don't think I'm, can solve all issues, but I know where I am and where I'm trying to focus on. I hope you stay in connection with the Shelby County Lead Prevention Group, Black Millennials for Flint, as we reintroduce this legislation to make sure we're reducing the number of parts per billion of lead in our children's drinking water. If we can get more drinking water sources that are contaminated out our schools. And so I'm going to be doing everything I can as a legislator to hold the legislature accountable to our children, and communicate that to the community. And I just thank everyone for their support, and let me know what more I can do to help you in this process.
And I'd like to thank y'all for having me, and also the Healthy Housing Partnership, because I've been in lead for a long time. I started working with lead and lead abatement and lead hazard control in 1992. And it is just so refreshing seeing some of the younger generation really taking these topics and running with them and getting them out. And now, you know, we have social media, we have things that we never had. So even though I'm tired, I really see a light that there's people that care, and we're not so siloed as we were. You know, when it first started, there was individual grants, individual associations, everybody doing their own thing. But now with the partnership, with these commissions, with these collaborations, we're really seeing a difference with people working together, in that power of us partnering and working towards the common goal. So I'd like to thank y'all for having me today. And yeah.
Awesome. Well, just a few closing housekeeping things. So we were live on Facebook. I put the link to the Black Millennials for Flint Facebook link in earlier. This is also being recorded. So one of the best practices that we have is post-event, we'll share the recording. We'll also share FAQ. There have been some valuable resources that were dropped in the chat box. We also will have contact information for you to have with the commission, of course, with Black Millennials for Flint, ways to engage with Sharon and also with Representative Lamar. So expect to receive that. If not later on today, you should get it by tomorrow. And so with that, you all be safe, mask up. No, I don't have my mask on, but I'm here by myself.
Yeah.
And we hope to see you at the next meeting. Right.
And I just want to say Green and Healthy Homes is here for everybody for information or what y'all need for your clients. So meant to plug that a minute ago.
Yeah, and I forgot that one quick thing about that with GHHI, they really provide direct sources to the people. With the commission, we've had folks to reach out to us stating that they needed support with getting home inspections and testing. And so I've seen that, you know, with my own eyes, with GHHI really stepping up to the plate. I see that Chet is also, Kibble is also on today. Also can do home inspections. You know, the first step is knowing. The second step is doing something about it. So please reach out to any of us and we'd be happy to support. All right, you all have a phenomenal rest of your Tuesday.
Thanks.
Bye.